It began with a smile, soft, restrained, and so deceptively calm that no one imagined it would one day ignite an international manhunt. But long before the world panicked over the missing woman in the painting, long before newspapers screamed her name across front pages, she hung quietly in a French museum where visitors passed without understanding they were looking at the future center of global obsession. Yet everything would change on a warm August morning in 1911, when a man dressed like a simple worker stepped into the Louvre with a purpose that was anything but ordinary. He walked with the ease of someone who belonged there. To the guards, he was invisible, just another maintenance hand among dozens who clocked in and out of the massive Palestine Museum. He did not glance around nervously. He did not rush. He knew exactly what he was doing. His name was Vincenzo Peruggia, an Italian immigrant, a former Louvre handyman, a man with a belief, twisted or patriotic, depending on who told the story, that the masterpiece that had become France's pride was actually Italy's rightful treasure. But the truth was more complicated. And so was he. That morning the halls of the Louvre echoed faintly with early footsteps, light chatter, and the slow hum of a massive institution waking up. The museum was not crowded. Mondays were traditionally quiet. Peruggia blended in perfectly. His white smock hung loose on his narrow frame, his mustache trimmed neatly, his eyes steady despite the storm brewing inside his mind. He passed by sculptures, tapestries, and paintings older than countries, until he reached the Salon Carré, the room where Leonardo da Vinci's mysterious portrait hung behind a sheet of protective glass. Not the bulletproof, high-tech protection used today. This was 1911. Security meant one thin pane of glass and a sleepy guard who assumed everyone in uniform belonged there. Peruggia paused at the painting. For a moment the world seemed to fall away. No footsteps, no chatter, no watchful eyes. Only her. The woman with the gaze that followed you no matter where you stood. The small, unreadable smile. The calm that seemed to hide something deeper, something fragile, something secret. To Peruggia, she wasn't the world's greatest masterpiece. She wasn't a symbol of the Renaissance. She wasn't a priceless treasure. She was Italy. Italy stolen by France. At least that's what he told himself. It made the weight of his coming crime feel lighter. He glanced once more down the corridor. No one. He stepped forward, fingers brushing the frame. The glass was dusty at the corners. The room wasn't meticulously cleaned back then. The painting was smaller than most expected, far more modest in size than the legends suggested. Peruggia had once worked on the protective casing. He knew its weaknesses better than anyone. With one quick motion, he lifted the frame off the wall. Nothing happened. No sirens, no alarms, no shouts. Just silence. He carried the painting to a staircase where he knew few people ever passed. There, hidden by shadows and stone, he removed the frame, loosened the screws, and gently pulled the panel free. The wood was surprisingly light, poplar, old but strong. He wrapped it in his smock, tucked it under his arm like a carpenter carrying a board, and walked straight out the museum's side door. A guard nodded at him on his way out. "Good morning, monsieur." "Good morning." And that was it. The greatest art heist in history, executed in mere minutes. By the time the museum realized the Mona Lisa was gone, 24 hours later, the painting had already crossed Paris unseen, tucked away in a small boarding room where Peruggia lived. The theft should have been impossible, should have sparked immediate chaos, should have exposed the cracks in the Louvre's security. But instead, chaos began with a single empty wall. A guard noticed first. He assumed the painting had been removed for routine photography. Hours passed before anyone bothered to ask the photography department, and when they answered, "No, we haven't taken it," the room froze. The silence that followed felt like ice cracking beneath their feet. Then came the shouting, the rushing footsteps, The frantic calls for directors, curators, anyone who could confirm the unthinkable. By noon, entire wings were sealed. By evening, the French police were combing through the Louvre like ants through a broken nest. Reporters caught wind of the panic by night. By morning, newspapers across Paris declared one word in bold ink: stolen. The Mona Lisa vanished. People flooded the Louvre hopping to see the empty space where she once hung, as if the absence itself had become a relic. France was humiliated. Italy was confused. The world was electrified. And the mysterious woman with the half-smile, who for centuries had been admired mostly by art scholars, suddenly became famous beyond imagination. The theft transformed her. The world no longer saw her as a portrait. They saw her as a legend. And she wasn't the only one gaining unwanted attention. The police dragged in artists, painters, copyists, museum workers. They interrogated guards, janitors, known thieves. They even questioned Pablo Picasso and poet Guillaume Apollinaire, who had once joked publicly that the Louvre should be burned down. Headlines exploded. Rumors multiplied. Theories flourished like wildfire. But not one of them guessed the truth. The thief was quietly sitting in his cramped room, the Mona Lisa hidden in a wooden trunk beneath his bed, listening to newsboys shout headlines about his crime through the streets. And the longer Peruggia kept her, the more dangerous the situation became. The painting was now the most recognizable object in Europe. Selling it was nearly impossible. Moving it was risky. Even speaking of it could lead to prison. Yet he held on to his belief, a belief shaped by pride, history, and a simmering conviction that Leonardo's masterpiece had been wrongfully taken from Italy centuries ago. But a strange bond began to form. Every night, Peruggia would lift the wooden panel from the trunk and set it gently on the table. He would stare into her eyes, the same eyes millions would one day travel across continents to see. The same eyes that made entire rooms fall silent. He whispered to her sometimes, "Tornerai a casa, Lisa. You're going home, Lisa." But home was far away, and Peruggia had no plan, only passion. Meanwhile, the police chase grew colder. Detectives found fingerprints on the empty frame but had no way to match them. Every major border crossing was watched. Museums across Europe were alerted. Ships were searched. But the painting had vanished so perfectly that many assumed the thief must have been a professional, someone with resources, connections, a global market waiting. No one imagined a single immigrant worker hiding it beneath his bed. Weeks passed. Then months. Then 2 years. The Mona Lisa was officially considered lost. Some believed it had been destroyed. Some believed wealthy collectors were bidding secretly. Others believed it was hidden in some aristocrat's private room, never to be seen again. But the truth was quieter, sadder, and more human. It sat in a wooden trunk in a dusty Paris apartment. And Peruggia was running out of options. He knew he couldn't keep her forever, not if she was meant to return to Italy. He needed a buyer, someone patriotic enough to help him reclaim the painting, someone who wouldn't betray him. And so, in late 1913, he reached out carefully to an art dealer in Florence. He used a false name at first. He was vague, cautious, terrified. The dealer assumed he was a crank, another delusional man claiming to possess the world's most famous missing portrait. But Peruggia convinced him to meet in person. Italy was the place he chose to reveal his secret. The homeland of Leonardo da Vinci. The homeland of Lisa del Giocondo. The homeland he believed he was restoring. Carrying a hidden masterpiece across borders was reckless, insane even, but Peruggia managed it. He packed the painting inside a double-bottomed suitcase, the wooden panel wrapped in a cloth like a fragile relic. When border agents asked what was inside, he smiled and simply said, "Personal belongings." No one inspected further. And so, after 2 years of silence, the Mona Lisa slipped out of France unnoticed, just as she had slipped out of the Louvre. This time, however, she was heading toward the truth, toward the reveal, toward an explosion of global attention that would forever cement her as the most famous painting on Earth. Because once Italy saw her again, once experts in Florence examined her, once the news spread that the Mona Lisa had been found, the world would change. And Vincenzo Peruggia, the quiet carpenter who had walked out of a museum carrying a global treasure under his arm, was about to face the consequences of the crime that had made her immortal. The train rattled across the Italian countryside as Vincenzo Peruggia sat stiffly in his seat, clutching the small suitcase between his feet as though it were alive. Outside the window, the world rolled by in soft greens and golds, olive groves rising like scattered sentinels, the hum of wheels blending with the steady pounding of his own heartbeat. He kept his hat pulled low. His hands trembled slightly despite his attempt to appear calm. Inside that suitcase lay the world's most wanted woman. Wrapped delicately in cloth, cushioned by shirts and a false wooden panel, the Mona Lisa traveled silently, Leonardo da Vinci's timeless smile hidden beneath silent layers, unaware that nations were still arguing about her fate, unaware that her disappearance had turned a modest museum piece into an icon of global frenzy. Peruggia exhaled slowly. Home. He was bringing her home. At least that's what he told himself over and over, a mantra to justify the weight of the crime resting on his shoulders. It helped him sleep during those 2 uneasy years. It helped him ignore the news, the suspicion, the endless rumors. It helped him endure the tightening fear that any day someone would knock on his door and drag him away. But now, Italy's borders were behind him. The French police were hundreds of miles away. The world believed the painting was either destroyed or hidden by a mastermind collector. And he, a simple laborer with calloused hands and a hopeful heart, was about to deliver the masterpiece to the land where Leonardo had been born. The train pulled into Florence under a warm afternoon sun, casting long shadows across the platform. Peruggia stepped off, gripping his suitcase as tightly as ever. People bustled around him, going about their day without the faintest idea of the priceless relic passing so closely. The air smelled like roasted chestnuts, ink, and dust. Church bells echoed from across the city. Florence, the birthplace of the Renaissance. He felt something tighten in his chest, pride, fear, longing, he couldn't tell. He made his way through winding streets until he stood before a set of wooden doors belonging to an art dealer named Alfredo Geri. The man had seemed skeptical at first, even mocking when Vincenzo wrote to him. But curiosity had won. After all, every month someone claimed to have the Mona Lisa. Most were lunatics, some were forgers, a few were clever scammers. But something in Vincenzo's letter, its tone, its insistence, the quiet emotion between the lines, had pushed Geri to accept a meeting. Peruggia knocked. The door opened a crack, revealing Geri's sharp eyes behind small spectacles. "You're the man from the letter?" Geri asked, hesitant. Vincenzo nodded. They stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of varnish and old books. Paintings lined the walls, some genuine, some copies, some too damaged to save. A single lamp burned on a desk covered in papers, relief maps, and sketches. Geri stared at the small suitcase on the floor. "You said you had something for me." Peruggia swallowed. His throat felt dry as dust. "Yes," he whispered. Geri motioned toward the desk. "Let's see it then." A long, heavy silence fell as Vincenzo knelt, opened the suitcase, and slowly lifted the wrapped panel. His fingers shook. The air felt colder. The moment stretched almost painfully. He placed the panel gently on the desk, peeled back the cloth. And the room stopped breathing. Geri blinked once. Then again. Then leaned in closer. His lips parted as if he had been punched in the chest. The subtle smile. The smoky sfumato, the gentle curve of the hands, the atmospheric landscape fading into mist. There was no doubt. It was her. The silence shattered. "Madonna Santa," Jerry whispered, stumbling backwards. It can't be real." "It is real," Vincenzo said softly. "I kept her safe, I brought her home." Home," Jerry stammered, still staring in disbelief. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I took back what belongs to Italy," Peruggia replied with a conviction that surprised even himself. Jerry didn't respond. Instead, he crossed the room, opened another door, and shouted for someone. A moment later, Professor Giovanni Poggi, director of the Uffizi Gallery, stepped inside. Poggi was a quiet, serious man with an air of authority. When he saw the painting, he froze as if struck by lightning. He approached slowly, trembling. "Is it truly?" He bent close, examining the brushstrokes, the subtle glazes, the crackle of the centuries-old panel. "It's her," Poggi breathed. "This is the Mona Lisa." Time felt suspended. Generations of Italian heritage seemed to hum quietly in the room. Then the shift. The tension. The realization. Jerry and Poggi exchanged a look that Vincenzo didn't understand, but should have. In that instant, the air changed. The tone changed. The destiny of the painting changed. Poggi stood upright. "Solemn. Signor Peruggia, we must inform the authorities." Vincenzo's heart slammed against his ribs. "The authorities? No, I brought her back for Italy. For you, for Florence, for our people." Jerry sighed heavily, his face softening with sympathy. "And Italy thanks you truly, but the law is the law." Vincenzo took a step back, gripping the table. "You will arrest me." "We must follow procedure," Poggi said gently. "But do not be afraid. Your intentions will be considered." Panic surged through Peruggia's chest. He had expected celebration, recognition, perhaps a small reward. He imagined the Italian government welcoming the return of their stolen treasure. He imagined crowds cheering. He imagined a hero welcome. But instead this. A mistake, a misunderstanding, a crime. He felt the room spin. Within hours, the police arrived at his modest hotel, where he had returned to wait, unaware that the authorities had been contacted behind his back. They knocked politely, respectfully, as if aware that the man inside had become a strange blend of criminal and patriot. He opened the door, resigned. They placed cuffs on his wrists. He didn't fight. He simply looked at them with tired eyes and asked, "Will she stay in Italy?" Silence. That answer, he knew, meant everything. The news spread like wildfire. Headlines erupted across Italy, then Europe, then the world. La Gioconda ritrovata, the Mona Lisa found. The painting that had vanished without a trace had suddenly reappeared in Florence, carried there by the hands of a quiet Italian who claimed he had rescued her from foreign possession. Crowds gathered outside the Uffizi as the painting was temporarily displayed. People wept, some prayed, others cheered. For a brief moment, Italy felt reunited with one of its lost children. But France was not celebrating. They were furious. Humiliated once before by the theft, humiliated now by the discovery, they demanded the immediate return of the painting. Negotiations began instantly. Diplomatic tension simmered. Legal experts debated over history, ownership, restoration rights, treaties, and cultural legacy. In the middle of this international storm sat Vincenzo Peruggia, alone in a cell, listening to the world arguing over the meaning of his act. His motives became an obsession. Some said he was a nationalist, a man driven by pride in history. Some said he was delusional. Some said he wanted money. Some said he loved the painting too much. But the truth was quieter. He wanted to matter. He wanted to be remembered. And now he would be. After brief exhibitions in Italy, the painting was returned, reluctantly, to France. She arrived back at the Louvre under heavy guard, welcomed by crowds larger than those that greeted kings. The Mona Lisa was no longer a quiet, admired portrait. She was a global celebrity. People traveled for days just to see her. Newspapers described her smile as reborn. Songs were written, poems crafted. The world treated her as though she had survived a kidnapping, a scandal, a resurrection. And she owed her fame, her massive leap into legend, to a single, ordinary man with a suitcase. Meanwhile, Peruggia stood trial. The courtroom was packed, journalists filled every corner, spectators lined up before dawn just to find seats. Many Italians saw him as a folk hero, others called him a fool. The French wanted justice, the Italians wanted leniency. Peruggia himself seemed lost in the storm. He told the truth plainly. "I did not steal it, I took it back." The judges listened, debated, whispered among themselves. The crime was serious, but the man was no violent thief, no calculating mastermind. The painting was undamaged. It had been kept safe. The motive, whether misguided or romanticized, was rooted in sincerity. In the end, the court handed down a remarkably light sentence, barely more than a slap on the wrist. Several months in prison. A crime that shook the world ended with a punishment smaller than anyone expected. But something more important had happened. The painting that once drew modest attention had become a symbol of beauty, mystery, and cultural identity. Crowds doubled, then tripled. The Mona Lisa became the most famous face on earth, her smile now part of the world's collective imagination. The theft made her immortal. And Vincenzo Peruggia. He returned to a quiet life, eventually marrying, having a daughter, and working as a painter and decorator. Ordinary again, unnoticed, a footnote in history, yet responsible for transforming the Mona Lisa into a global phenomenon. Still, late at night, when the world slept and memories grew louder, he often thought of the painting, of the eyes that watched him, of the calm smile, of the moment he carried her out of the Louvre like a sleepy child, of the years she spent hidden beneath his bed. He had never seen her again after his arrest. She was in France now, protected, admired, loved by millions. But he knew deep inside that for 2 years she belonged only to him. And that was something no history book could erase. The years after the trial unfolded quietly, almost too quietly, as though the world had decided that Vincenzo Peruggia's name had served its purpose and could now fade into the background. But history has a strange way of choosing who becomes unforgettable. Some are remembered for greatness, some for brilliance, some for cruelty, and some for a single, improbable act that reshapes the world in ways no one can predict. Peruggia, for all his intentions and all his mistakes, had done something no thief, no collector, no aristocrat, no obsessed admirer had ever managed to do. He changed the destiny of a painting. After the Mona Lisa returned to France in early 1914, the Louvre mounted the kind of security no one had ever considered before. Guards multiplied, procedures were rewritten, visitors were monitored. Artists who once copied paintings freely inside the museum were suddenly scrutinized like criminals. And yet, none of this could erase the truth. The greatest damage to the painting's safety had happened not through force, not through violence, but through simplicity, through the quiet walk of a man carrying it under his arm in broad daylight. When the Louvre rehung the painting, crowds swelled so large that lines twisted out the doors. For the first time, people traveled across borders to see a painting, not for its beauty, though that was part of it, but because it had become a global mystery, a survivor of scandal, a symbol of something delicate and precious. Some came to admire Leonardo's work. Others came to see the painting that had outsmarted Paris. Many came simply to say they had looked upon the face that vanished and returned. The Mona Lisa smiled the same as she always had, but now the world interpreted her differently. Her expression, mysterious, unreadable, seemed to hold secrets about where she had been, what she had seen, and why she had been taken. Newspapers referred to her as if she were alive. Some described her as kidnapped, others as rescued, and many as reborn. For centuries, she had been admired, but now she was adored. This transformation echoed across an entire generation, and while the world celebrated her, Vincenzo Peruggia sat far from the crowds, trying to rebuild the life he had left behind. After his release from prison, he returned to France briefly for work, though the country treated him with mixed emotions: curiosity from some, quiet amusement from others, and cold resentment from a few who had not forgotten the humiliation he caused. He felt eyes follow him sometimes, whispering, judging, recalling headlines of the man who slipped past France's pride. He left Paris soon after and returned to Italy for good, marrying a woman from his hometown. Together they had a daughter named Celestina. To her, he was not a criminal, not a patriot, not a thief, not a headline. He was simply Papa. He found work again as a painter and decorator, a simple, honest trade. The same hands that once lifted the Mona Lisa from the Louvre now held brushes dipped in paint, smoothing fresh coats across aging walls. He labored quietly, moving from job to job, leaving behind no signatures, no marks, nothing that carried the weight of his infamous act. But memory is not something that can be painted over. At night, when the world dimmed and the quiet crept in, Vincenzo often found himself replaying the moment he stood alone in a deserted Louvre hallway with the painting in his hands. The silence, the nerve, the certainty, the fear, the thrill, the idea, maybe foolish, maybe noble, that he was doing something worthy of history. In those moments, he felt young again, brave again, important again. But then he remembered the courtroom, the disappointment in the eyes of the Italian officials who obeyed the law rather than the fantasy he had created, the realization that the world didn't see him as a hero but as a curiosity, a strange man whose actions stirred more chaos than patriotism. He lived with that contradiction for the rest of his life. Meanwhile, the world continued its fascination. As the decades rolled on, the Mona Lisa grew more famous each year. The 1911 theft had changed her forever. Modern taste began to idolize masterpieces. Museums became global destinations. Artists referenced her. Writers romanticized her. Her image spread to posters, postcards, books, newspapers, even advertisements. Her smile became shorthand for mystery, grace, and timeless beauty. Then in 1932, she became the subject of songs and films. In 1950, Nat King Cole recorded Mona Lisa, a track that swept through America like a warm, haunting wind, cementing her as a cultural icon beyond the art world. Movie stars referenced her. Authors analyzed her. Psychologists debated her smile. Even conspiracy theories blossomed around her: hidden codes, secret identities, lost histories. Vincenzo watched this rise with a complicated heart. Part pride, part regret, part wonder. Without him, she would still be famous, but not like this, not a global symbol recognized in every corner of the world. He had created something he never intended. A myth. But fame for the painting did not mean comfort for the man. In his later years, he struggled with health issues. The world rarely mentioned him anymore. Italy had moved on. France barely remembered him except in archives. Even the newspapers that once splashed his name across bold headlines forgot the face behind the theft, focusing instead on the painting itself. As he aged, the stories exaggerated. Some versions painted him as a nationalist hero. Others portrayed him as mentally unstable. A few twisted his motives entirely, claiming greed or delusion. He did not correct them. He could not outrun them. He simply watched the versions of himself multiply like branches from a tree he never planted. He died in 1925, at the age of 44 from pneumonia. There were no international headlines, no tributes, no public reflection. He passed quietly, like a candle extinguished in a room no longer paying attention. His body was buried in a small cemetery. His name faded into dust. His daughter grew up knowing only fragments of the story that once captivated the world. His wife lived with the memory of a man who had tried, in his own flawed way, to do something meaningful. Years later, when war swept across Europe, Italy and France both faced destruction far beyond anything a stolen painting could symbolize. Yet amid the bombs, the shifting borders, and the fall of nations, the Louvre hid the Mona Lisa once again, this time to protect her from soldiers, not thieves. She was transported across France, concealed in castles, wrapped carefully to preserve her fragile frame, guarded like a living relic. She survived war. She survived theft. She survived centuries. And when she finally returned to the Louvre after World War II, she was greeted like a queen coming home from exile. By the 1960s, her fame had grown so immense that the museum decided she would travel internationally under strict protection. She visited the United States in 1963, drawing millions of visitors. People stood in lines that wrapped around city blocks, waiting for just a few seconds in front of her. It was no longer admiration. It was pilgrimage. And through all of it, Vincenzo's act, half mad, half idealistic, fully unforgettable, remained the spark that ignited her near-mythic status. In the 1970s and 1980s, her fame only grew. She appeared on T-shirts, billboards, magazines. She was parodied, altered, referenced, replicated. Her expression became one of the most reproduced images in human history. The world had 1,000 stories, but the Mona Lisa had one smile. Then in 2005, a remarkable thing happened. A reporter tracked down Peruggia's daughter, Celestina, living in France. She had kept quiet about her father, rarely speaking of him. But this time, she opened a worn wooden chest and revealed something extraordinary. Her father had kept the shirt he wore the day he stole the painting. A plain white smock. Old, yellowed with age, fragile. But real. A relic of one of history's most unbelievable heists. The world finally remembered Vincenzo again, not as a mastermind criminal, not as an artistic savior, not as a deranged thief, but as a flawed, passionate man whose act had reshaped the world of art forever. Today, the Mona Lisa sits behind bulletproof glass in the Louvre, watched by security cameras, guards, alarms, and the constant buzz of thousands of visitors who stand shoulder to shoulder, phones raised, whispering, marveling, smiling back at her. The room is always full. The crowd is always dense. The excitement is always electric. People push forward for a glimpse. They stand on tiptoe, shuffle through lines, and hold their breath when they finally reach the front. And there she is. Calm, unchanging, eternal. The woman who lived through centuries. The portrait that survived a thief's suitcase. The painting whose disappearance made her the most famous face on earth. Yet in quiet moments when the museum lights dim and the room empties, one might wonder, just for a second, if she remembers him. The man who lifted her from the wall. The man who carried her like a secret through the Paris streets. The man who whispered to her in the dark. The man who believed she deserved to go home. There is no proof she remembers. No sign. No message. Only the same half-smile, unchanged across time. But perhaps in that enigmatic curve of her lips, in that subtle warmth in her eyes, there is a trace, not of gratitude, not of sorrow, but of understanding. Because the world had forgotten Vincenzo Peruggia. But she never needed to. And as long as she hangs in the Louvre, protected and adored, drawing millions each year, her fame forever tied to the man who dared to take her, his story, quiet, complicated, human, will live on in the space between her smile and the shadows of history. That is the legacy of a painting. That is the legacy of a thief. And that is the reason a simple act on a quiet August morning in 1911 transformed art, culture, and the world forever. Even now, centuries later, the Mona Lisa continues to captivate. Scholars debate the meaning behind her smile. Psychologists speculate on the hidden depths of her gaze. Tourists crowd the Louvre every day, snapping photos, whispering names, and tracing their fingers along the edges of history, even though glass and guards keep them apart. Each visitor comes seeking something personal, beauty, mystery, or a connection to the past. And yet, in her quiet stillness, she offers nothing and everything all at once. Peruggia's role in her story is often reduced to a footnote. The man who stole her, a blip in time, forgotten in newspapers and history books.